Hello, everyone. My name is Yongkang. I'm a lead cloud native SE of Custom by Veeam, supporting Asia Pacific region. I am very passionate about Kubernetes technologies. By now, I'm actually 3 times Kubernetes certified, and I also collected 7 other Kubernetes badges in 2021. For those of you who are interested, feel free to connect me via any one of the ways listed here. So today's topic, how to build a Kubernetes engine from Google Cloud, short as GKE on Google Cloud. So there are sorry, I clicked the link. Let me come back to the slide deck. So there are so many ways to create a GKE cluster. So first of all, you can easily create a GKE cluster from a Google Cloud Web Console, or you can create a GKE cluster by gcloud command line tools. Here is a command, you just run gcloud container clusters create. And you might also, typically for developers, they might prefer to use the Google Cloud SDK. And you can also use Google Cloud REST API to make the API calls to create the GKE cluster. So additionally, if you like the infrastructure as a code or automation, you can use the Terraform modules to create a GKE cluster. So today, I'm going to show you how to create a GKE cluster from a web console, which is typically a lot easier. Here is a little bit preparation tasks. Obviously, you need a web browser. You need to have a Google Cloud account with enough permissions. I'm pretty sure the trial account also works. And you log into Google Cloud Console. And you need to select a project, or if you don't have a project, you can create a new Google Cloud project. You need to make sure the billing is enabled for your cloud project. Otherwise, you won't be able to complete the tasks. Last but not least, you need to enable Google Kubernetes Engine APIs. For those of you who are familiar to Google Cloud, for most of the services, you need to enable the API first. Before I jump to the console to show you how to create a GKE cluster, there are a few concepts which is probably only from Google Cloud, and I see it's advanced features. You got a lot options. So the first one is between the GKE standard cluster and autopilot cluster, what are the differences? So when you are going to create a GKE cluster, you will be asked which option you want to go. So standard is more for advanced configuration flexibility. Basically, you determine the configurations you need for your workloads. You got the control, but additional more tasks you need to do. And the second one is autopilot. Autopilot is a more like a fully provisioned or managed configurations. The cluster configuration options already made for you. It is pre-configured with optimized configurations. So here is a comparison table. So I read it this way. Do you need a zonal, create a zonal cluster? If you want to create a zonal cluster, I will talk about the difference between the regional and the zonal shortly. So if you need a zonal cluster, you go with standard. If you need a specific Kubernetes version, go with standard. If you need a routes-based routing, go with standard. Do you need an alpha feature? If you need a list here, all of these, you need to create a standard cluster. Otherwise, you don't have the full configuration capability options. With autopilot, it's more like a simple to use. Google Cloud manage a lot of tasks for you. You don't have to manage nodes, etc. Here is another configuration comparison table. So on this screen, you can see for standard mode cluster, GKE cluster, you need to configure auto-scaling by yourself. You need to manage and configure your nodes, and you need to configure basically all the options. But on the positive side, it does support all different Kubernetes workloads. On the left-hand side, you can see autopilot mode. You don't have to work on the auto-scaling nodes, configurations, etc. But there is a little bit of limitations. On the billing method side, autopilot also makes a lot of sense because it is based on pay by per pod rather than for standard cluster, it is pay by per node or per VM. Okay, that's a comparison between standard and the autopilot. There is another key concept here is what is a regional cluster and what is a zonal cluster. Let me start from a zonal cluster. Zonal cluster is more, you only have a single control plane in a single zone. That is called zonal cluster. But you do have two options. You can create a single zone cluster, which means your workloads are in the same zone as your control plane nodes. And you also have an option to create a multi-zonal cluster. That means you can choose your workloads are running in multiple zones. It is more for balanced availability and cost. But overall, it's not a high available option because you only have a single control plane in a single zone. On the other hand, on the other side, regional cluster, it is more for high availability requirements. Because both of the cluster control plane and its nodes are spread across multiple zones. By default, actually, your control plane is replicated across 3 zones of a region. And by default, you will see you got 9 nodes spread across 3 zones in the region. You got additional benefits. So the number one, high resiliency from all single zone failure. You can have the continuous control plane upgrade, resizes, or reduce the downtime. But just to highlight, even you create a regional cluster, your nodes also can be in the multi-zone or a single zone. Okay, the next concept is about a release channel. To me, I think is the Google. When it comes to Kubernetes cluster, Google really ahead of the rest of the cloud providers. So the release channel is for automatic management of your cluster version and also upgrade cadence. But you can also choose, if you want, you can choose a static version, which is more for direct management of your cluster versions. If you choose by default, actually, it is release channel selected. So on the picture, you can see there are 3 release channel. Rapid channel is more for early adopters, and the regular channel more for early majority. And the stable channel is more for majority of the customers. So each of the channel, you got the default version. So for rapid channel, right now it's 1.22.3. For regular channel, right now it's 1.21.6. And for stable channel, right now it's 1.20.12. But for each of the channel, you actually also have the option to choose other versions rather than default version. For example, if you choose to go to the latest 1.23, it is you can select the 1.23 from a rapid channel. Okay. I think from the concept point of view, that's all I want to cover for now. Now let me show you how to create a GKE cluster. In this demo, I will show you how to create a standard GKE cluster with a node pool. And I might just choose a zonal cluster. And I choose use the regular release channel. And after the cluster created, I can deploy a sample application to the cluster. And then I can show you how to access the containerized application from public IP addresses. Okay, let me jump to the Google Cloud Console. From here, I'm actually already in the Google Kubernetes engine page. But if you are not here yet, from the navigation menu, or sometimes people call hamburger, menu. From here, you can choose if Kubernetes engine already pinned here, you choose from here. Otherwise, it's on the computer. You can click Kubernetes engine. And from here, let me click create. So after I click create, I got two options. Do you want to go standard or autopilot? For this case, I might just choose standard. Remember, the big difference is, so GKE standard is pay per node, but GKE autopilot, that's pay per pod. So I will go ahead and click create configure from next to GKE standard. I'm here in the page to create a Kubernetes cluster. So first of all, I need to give a name. Let me call it GKE for Yongkang. By default, it's a zonal cluster. I don't want to choose regional for now because for the testing purpose, I don't need the high availability, but I just want to show you the possibility, the options here. So I leave the zone as a US Essential 1C. That's my control plane will be created here, but you got the options. You can choose default node location. You can choose other, zone. By default, my nodes will be created in the same zone as my control plane. In this case, I was using US Essential 1C. But if I choose a regional, you will see after you choose regional here, you can also choose which zone you're going to deploy. So for now, let me just leave it as zonal, and I'm not going to choose any default node locations. So moving down to the screen, you can see you can choose the control plane version. You can choose a static version. By default, it's release channel. By default, it's a regular channel default. But you can choose a rapid channel or stable channel. And once you make the selection, if you want to see what are other options, I can click the version. So right now, regular channel, the default version 1.21.6. Okay, and basically you can go ahead and just click create. So we're going to create the cluster. But before I go ahead and create the cluster, I want to show you some other options on the left-hand side. So there is a default pool will be created part of the creation of the GKE cluster. So if I click a default pool, you can see you can name to a different, give a different name for the default pool. You can choose number of nodes, how many nodes you're going to create part of the pool. I just leave it as a 3 for now. And then you have some advanced options. Remember, we're creating a standard GKE cluster. You need to configure scaling by yourself. So you got the options to enable auto scaling. You can specify node location, etc. And then you can specify the surge upgrade, options here as well. And if I click on the node, you can also customize which node instance type or machine type you're going to use. By default, it's containerized, container optimized OS selected the image type, but you can choose any other machine family. By default, it's E2 right now. The machine type, it's E2 medium for my testing purpose. 2 CPU, 4G memory, that's enough for me. And the boot disk size, 100 gig, it's enough for me. For the networking, and there are some additional settings. I'm gonna just leave it as a default. By default, maximum ports per node is 110. Okay, you can also customize the node pool port address range, but for now, I'm just leave it as automatic. And you can also choose some advanced node security options here. You can add in some additional metadata like a Kubernetes labels. So you can add the node tags, etc. Okay, I'm not going to configure any advanced options here now. So there are additional advanced options here. If I click automation here, you can enable maintenance window. You can enable notification. You can enable vertical port auto scaling. You can enable node auto provisioning, etc. For now, I'll leave it as a default. For networking, you can choose your specific network, and you can choose your specific node subnet, etc. For me, I just create a public cluster. That makes it easier. And by default, we're using VPC native traffic routing. Moving down to security side, yeah, Google actually pretty much, heavily invested in the security options. So you can see by default, we enable the shielded GKE nodes, but there are some additional options if you choose to use, and additional metadata if you want to add labels, add some descriptions, and feature-wise, you can choose to enable additional features from this page. So for now, I'm not going to use any advanced options here. I just want to highlight by default, Google actually, they already have the CSI driver enabled when you create the cluster. So you don't have to separately install CSI drivers, which is pretty advanced, pretty handy. I love it. So before I click create, I really want to show you, if you prefer to create using command line tools or using REST API, Google actually, so far I found, the only provider to generate the command line scripts for you, to generate the REST API, parameters for you. If I want to find out how I can make an API calls to create a GKE cluster, I just click REST. So here you go. You can copy the whole line here. You can use your familiar tools to make an API call to create the GKE cluster. Either, you can use the curl command, or you can use Postman, or whatever any tools you are familiar with. Okay. So the other option is if you prefer to use gcloud CLI, just click a command line. Here you go. Here is a command line to show you how to create the GKE cluster using the gcloud command line tools. You just copy to clipboard. And if you choose to, you can actually click run in Cloud Shell. It will launch Cloud Shell, run the command to create the GKE cluster. For the purpose of this demo, let me go ahead, create the cluster from the UI. Okay, after I click submitting the creation of the GKE cluster, Google actually, for those of you who are not aware, Google to create a GKE cluster from a Google Cloud, it only takes 4 minutes. So most of the time, less than 4 minutes, could be 3.5. Maximum time I notice is only need 4 minutes. So right now we are creating the GKE cluster in about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, the cluster will be ready. Okay, while we are waiting for the cluster creation finish, let me come back to my slide deck. Let's see. So right now we are creating a standard GKE cluster. Okay, so once the cluster is up running, I will show you how to deploy a sample application to the cluster. But before you can deploy a sample application, so let's verify to see if the GKE cluster is up running. So how to verify? So first of all, from any one of the command line, you need to retrieve the GKE kube config file. So here is a command to retrieve the GKE kube config file. So you run the command from a command line to any one of the terminals. You run gcloud, or you can choose to run from a Google Cloud Shell. So gcloud container clusters get credentials followed by your cluster name and your zone. Okay, so that's the command. to retrieve the kube configure. But if you're running from your MacBook or your Windows, any one of the terminal, you don't have the G-Cloud CLI installed. You need to have the G-Cloud this command line tools installed first. And then you need to run G-Cloud init command to initialize the configuration. And you need to log into the G-Cloud before you can run this command, G-Cloud container clusters, to get the credential to retrieve the GKE kube configure. Okay, once you retrieve the kube configure, you can verify the cluster status via the command. Could be running kube control cluster information, or just verify the node status. Okay, so let me check if the cluster is running okay. So far, the cluster is running okay. And let me probably walk you through a little bit more of the slide deck. So once I verified my cluster is up running, so how to deploy a sample application to GKE cluster? So I just use the sample application from Google Cloud. So I clone the Git repository. So Git clone from a Google Cloud platform, their GitHub page, GitHub repository, microservices demo. And then I changed to the directory. Basically, you just cd, microservices dash demo. And after that, you run the command to create the application. It is a containerized microservices application. You've got multiple microservices. You've got the front end, you've got a back end, you've got the card service, you've got a payment service, etc. If you want to, check all the details, you can actually just copy the HTTPS, the GitHub page link. It will open a web page to show you the details. Okay, how to create the application? You just run one command, kube control apply with the Kubernetes manifest YAML file. That's how to deploy the sample application to the Kubernetes cluster. So let's see if the cluster is still going okay. Okay, so actually the cluster is already up running. Since the cluster is already up running, let me actually open up my Cloud Shell. So I'm here in the Cloud Shell. So all I need to do is I just run the git clone. Oh no, sorry, give me 1 second. I need to retrieve the kube configure file first. Otherwise, you won't be able to access the cluster. So I copy the command gcloud container clusters get credentials with my cluster name, my zone name. So now I can verify my cluster status, get node status. You can see I got 3 nodes, and right now the nodes are up running. Only 95 seconds ago, it is running 1.21.6. That's from the regular channel. So it looks like my cluster is up running and it is running okay. And now let me clone the repository from a Google Cloud Git repository page. So now I change it to the directory microservices demo. I run a command kube apply, kube control apply. From the releases folder, there is a Kubernetes manifest.yaml file. So I press enter. So part of the YAML file, we created service, we created the deployment, we create actually multiple services are created, multiple deployments. And yeah, that's how we deploy a sample application to the GKE cluster. So it's been done, but how to verify? So you can verify from the command line. So I got all of the services actually deployed from the default namespace. You can monitor the port status. So if I get to the port status -w, I can watch the status. So yeah, it looks like everything is running okay. So now if you want to verify using the UI, let me minimize the Cloud Shell. And from the workloads on the left-hand side, you can see I got multiple services are up running. And yeah, you might ignore the service, don't have a minimum availability. Yeah, there is additional requirements. For the purpose of this demo, I don't need that AD service, okay? So if I click the services, that's where you can find your front end, your external IP address, how to access my, microservices, which I deployed. Basically, it's a web application. So I click this link from the external load balancer. Here we go. This is an online boutique application, which is I just deployed moments ago. So it is running okay. And if you want to, you can click, you can add it to cart, etc. So it is all running good. But there are multiple services to support the application. If I come back to here, you can see you got a checkout service, you got a front end service, you got payment service, you got product catalog service, shipping service, etc. Okay, so let me come back to my slide deck. So only like a few seconds, we deployed a sample application to the GKE cluster, and we'll also access the web application via the web browser. So that's pretty much all I want to cover for now. So there is a few reference links if you want to know more details. So first of all, the standard versus autopilot cluster. So what are the differences? Here is an official link from a Google Cloud. Here is an official link about a regional versus zonal cluster. And here is an official link how to create a zonal cluster. And from there, you can see the rest of the options, like how to create a regional cluster, how to create a private cluster, how to create an alpha cluster, etc. There is a little bit other information I also listed here. So you can try my free automation tool. So right now available for Google Kubernetes Engine, for Azure Kubernetes Service, for AWS EKS, for Red Hat OpenShift. So for Google Cloud, it is the fastest cloud provider being able to launch a cluster just under 10 minutes. So you only need actually 6 minutes. You run one command with the automation. We're going to build a GKE cluster plus a PostgreSQL database, plus a custom K10, plus create a backup policy, etc. All done in just 6 minutes, one command. Okay, for Azure Cloud, you need like 8 minutes, but we're going to build EKS plus MySQL plus K10. For AWS Cloud, it does take 20 minutes, one command, build the EKS cluster plus Cassandra plus K10 plus backup policy. For IBM Cloud, I was building with this automation, one command, 45 minutes to build an OpenShift cluster container platform plus OpenShift data foundation or OCS plus MongoDB plus K10. So additional information, if you're interested, so I got the link here. I will share all the links in my YouTube channel as well. How to build a popular Kubernetes cluster, OpenShift, ROSA, Tanzu, Alibaba Cloud Container Service for Kubernetes, HP Ezmeral container platform. How to back up the containers once you build the cluster. How to back up the containers, and how to build and protect the Kubernetes cluster via automation. All of these are in YouTube videos I recorded some time back, and how to build the popular Kubernetes cluster. Yeah, that's all I want to cover for today. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. I hope it is useful to you. Feel free to connect with me via any one of the ways listed here. Thank you very much for your time.